Hello, everyone. Hello, Venerable Nisabho, Ajahn. So this is another Wednesday evening with the Clear Mountain YouTube channel. And this evening, as we do once a month, Ajahn Nisabho and I have a conversation around a particular topic. And we've kind of used this general format of finding blank in its opposite. So our topic for this evening is finding the real in the digital age. So that will be the theme for the evening. And we can start off with a brief guided meditation. So everyone can basically come back into your body. So right now, all of us are on the internet or the computer in some capacity. Whether it's Ajahn Nisabho and I speaking, or people watching screens, or with ear pods, or some other visual and auditory input and connection to the devices around us. But as we're connected in this way, still we can stay embodied. So for the next 5 minutes or so, we can just pay attention to what it feels like to stay fully embodied. So many people have experimented with what can be called the scanning technique, where you pay attention to the feelings at the top of the head and then scan down the face, through the torso and the legs, and then just noting any sensation that you feel all the way down to the soles of the feet, and then going back up, just scanning in this way. And if you're familiar with that, you can do this, or you can also experiment if you can just go whole body and just hold awareness in this, with this big mind. Maintain awareness of the posture, keeping our body upright, the spine with its vertebrae stacked one on top of the other to keep us alert, but fully relaxed with all the rest of our body. All the muscles can just be fully at ease. And the more we can practice like this, whether it's scanning or just knowing whole body, and not just thinking whole body, thinking about different body parts or imagining a visual image of the body, but really just fully immersing in this interoceptive sense, what it feels like to have a body from the inside. And the more we can do this, the more it can act as a protection while we're engaging, especially with the digital world, because our screens and all the stimulation, the input and the output coming in and out of our digital nexus, they can pull us in. They can pull our attention, and then our whole body can just slump into the screen. But if we can stay big, keep the mind big, knowing whole body, or at least staying in the body, it gives us some immunity. And then just in the last 30 seconds or minute or so, see if you can imbue this full body awareness with a sense of loving kindness, just a softness, a warmth, and a friendliness. May my full body be at ease. May I be happy, and may all beings be happy. Okay. So, on to our more cognitive and kind of dialectical or conversation mode. So Ajahn Nisabho and I will talk on this theme for about 25 minutes or half an hour, and then we'll switch it over and take questions. So people can write any questions that you have on this broad theme of maintaining Dhamma, or the real world and the digital world, and how to bridge this, what often seems like a gap for many people. So our conversation will kind of just circle around, what does it mean to interact with the digital world, and should we just fully pull away? Is there a place and a time to just fully step back from all digital use, from just give up our computers, smash our iPhones, and throw them in the lake? I know monks who've done that before. They just get fed up. Is there a place for that? Is that the right path? Or is more an integrative path, a more integrative approach where you actually look for the good in the digital world, look for the Dhamma online? Is it some kind of middle ground between these? And how does one, if one is going to interact with this world behind the black mirrors, how do we do it? How do we maintain our practice, knowing the four satipatthanas, knowing the mind, body, feelings, mind states in and of themselves? How do we maintain this? Because this is really the heart of Buddhist mindfulness and the heart of Buddhist practice. How do we do that without getting sucked into the screen? So that's a bit of a preamble. So,
do you mind if I jump in and ask you some questions, Ajahn?
That's great, and I will do the same. Back to you.
All right. Well, first, Ajahn, I think you're working with another theme of, finding energy in the midst of being vaccinated yesterday. So you're looking good. I always really appreciate these conversations. I think we both do. We usually got, in the old days, we got to talk about Dhamma on alms round together. And, especially when people gave us like each a cup of coffee, we would talk a lot. So this is one of the few chances we have these days to actually get into depth in this way. So, well, one thing I wanted to ask you, Ajahn, is it seemed like there was a few different, I mean, this is obviously just such a huge topic for us in our personal practice and in Clear Mountain. And it struck me that we've talked about this a lot. So I'm curious, it strikes me that there's three different aspects of the Dhamma which we've really had to negotiate around in terms of our use of technology. One is the aspect of humility, and specifically how we've framed Clear Mountain and its activities so that the content of the Dhamma isn't compromised by the context of an online forum and all that entails. So, this aspect of humility, how we navigate that in an online context, and, even, commenting as a profile online. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And then also the aspect of, I guess you call just freedom. The Buddha said that just as all the water in the ocean has one taste, that of salt, even so the Dhamma has one taste, that of freedom or liberation. And, where have you found, how have you navigated that aspect of keeping a taste of freedom in your interaction with the online world. And then the third aspect I was going to bring up was one of like Kalyana or beauty, but I think that actually plays into this aspect of humility and freedom for me. So maybe just focusing on those two. How have you worked with those, Ajahn?
Oh, yeah, really interesting points. Yeah, in terms of humility, just as you were talking, I was realizing. So right now, I'm looking at an iPad, which is on a tripod, and really, it almost perfectly mirrors what anybody who's been to Thailand or Burma would have seen, like in a traditional Dhamma talk context, where the senior monk is like holding this fan in front of their face. It's got a stick, a stand, just like the tripod, and then it's got this, yeah, kind of detailed and flourishy uh, fan, which basically serves to cover the monk's face,
Mm.
and also to cover the lay people's face. And I think I would think it was very weird to see it in America. So it's definitely not something which you see very much in America used. But yeah, there is an aspect of, when I'm not seeing people's faces, which we're not, you and I basically are just seeing each other right now. Our streaming platform called Restream is not like, showing, a constant stream of like happy faces and like, hearts and things kind of scrolling down as people react, or at least my screen isn't. So basically, it's just me trying to talk Dhamma with myself in a room with no one else. So really, in a sense, it actually is, while we're doing it, it's actually, there are less cues for self-righteousness and pride than there would be if you're giving a Dhamma talk without a fan, and you're just looking around and you're kind of gauging people's reactions and saying, oh, this person laughed or they smiled, or it seems like they're paying attention at this point and they're not paying attention over there. So there is an aspect, at least while sharing the Dhamma, of this, yeah, kind of forced humility. We have no idea how anyone is reacting as we're saying. Well, we've got some idea. I think there's a way to look at people's reactions. But that was just my initial thought regarding humility. Would you want to respond to that? I think it's a fascinating question before I jump into freedom. Or
Yeah. I mean, this aspect of how we maintain humility and respect for the Dhamma has just been central on, only the pandemic forced our tradition almost universally onto YouTube. Beforehand, it was quite a big debate in certain circles. And it's a real thing. Like, YouTube's okay? Is it okay if there's ads? Is TikTok okay? We've generally come down on no on that one. So, but it's a real question. One thing I think that is interesting, Ajahn, is you talked about how there's less room for this uh, self-reflexive pride, and I found it to be otherwise slightly in that, or at least that there is a danger in the gamification of view counts, which, for example, on our website, we remove the view count uh, widget so that we can't see that, but you can't remove it on YouTube. In fact, we used to be able to hide our subscriber count, and now we can't hide it anymore. They removed that function. And one thing that's really struck me is there was a really good podcast on uh, Twitter as the gamification of discourse, basically, and how what happens is because you see a view count, but you can't see the depth of an impact. Like, say you're in a classroom teaching or a Dhamma talk, like someone might come up to you after the Dhamma talk, and maybe it sort of landed mildly for most people, but then one or two people were genuinely deeply moved, and you get to see that and feel that. And so much of the Dhamma is like that, like you aren't necessarily aiming for breadth of impact so much as it's just meaningful if you touch one person, and you do lose that that feedback on an online platform often is like, all you get to see is the view count, and you don't see, one person who was really deeply touched versus another who just watched it and it slipped away. It's still one view for each. So yeah, on one level, I think you're right, Ajahn. Like there is less room for that. I mean, you're just staring at your screen. And on another level, I am wary of that. You know, it's definitely something to be wary account of, like sort of gamifying this. Something which should not be. And one of the best lessons my dad taught me actually was, I was thinking about, there was a Dhamma talk coming up, and I didn't know if I'd spoken as well as I could have. And I said, there's only like 3 or 4 people there. And he said, like, it shouldn't matter if there's one person or 100. It's exactly the same. And I thought that was pretty profound. And it's always interesting to kind of be chastised by your father as a monk, and appropriate in this case. So that's the danger for me, is keeping in mind that the Dhamma is there's a different metric going on that's mysterious and deeper and different, and that's not reflected in YouTube subscriber count.
Right, right.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, there's a whole aspect of like setting, or the accoutrement and all the things which, the quality of the video camera or the audio and all these things which, yeah, really don't go into the profundity of the Dhamma. And you have these recordings of Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Dan, or I don't think about Ajahn Man, but yeah, very old recordings where it's very low quality, but still like the essence of the Dhamma comes through. And yeah, there's a weird kind of algebra that goes into it in terms of, watching view count. So yeah, that is certainly a danger. In terms of freedom, the freedom that's allowed through the internet, I mean,
And I mean that internal sense of freedom specifically as well, like of being bound by it or not as well. Sorry, Ajahn, go on.
That's a good clarification, because I was just going to speak to, say, Ajahn Jayasaro, who has like physical freedom. He does all these online offerings, and then for the rest of his week, a lot of people think he's really busy, but he's actually not busy at all. He's got these regular Dhamma outputs that he does digitally, but for the rest of the time, he's living alone in this ashram, basically by himself. So that's an external freedom. But yeah, the internal freedom really does kind of wax and wane. And yeah, it's important to maximize it and figure out the triggers or the supportive conditions which lead to the non-collapse. At the beginning, I was doing that guided meditation on keeping one's posture upright and having this all-around sense of a big mindfulness of the body. And those things really do encourage this sense of mental freedom, this non-grasping onto, whatever it is that text on the screen. If I'm staying with the body, I'm not going to be pulled out to whatever thing on the screen is pulling my attention. But there are all sorts of small and large skillful means around maximizing and conditioning that sense of mental movement. I'm not a slave. I don't want to be a slave to my device. And I know the apps and I know the websites which would lead to that. And there are different, ways to block those or to avoid those. So on this point, I mean, this is one thing which, you and I both, we did spend a lot of time in our forest monasteries away from internet use. Like it just wasn't an option for, a fair amount of our monk's life. And then kind of jumping on this, Clear Mountain Monastery project where we do have this. Right now, we are just a digital monastery. It doesn't exist. We don't have land yet. So I'm curious if you have any skillful means about maintaining or maximizing this sense of mental freedom and agility while using computers rather than just being sucked into them, which I think so many people are who don't have Dhammic input.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have really navigated this together a lot, I know. And one interesting thing we've tried to do is map on the monk's Vinaya onto the internet, basically. So one monastic Vinaya stricture we have is that we can't enter town after midday without informing another monk. So basically, the monks are allowed to go into a populated area between dawn and midday to collect their food, and then they're expected to return to the forest or the monastery. And then if you need to go into town in the evening or afternoon, you have to inform another monk, and it's considered the inappropriate time, wikala. And so Ajahn Kovilo and I've tried to actually make a bit of a habit of aligning our emails with the uh, early hours of the day and then after midday to cut off that interaction with the external world in that way. And I've not been perfect at this. And on one level, we're bootstrapping a monastery together, so it does necessitate some um, some compromise. But I think it is a really good thing to aim for. Is having these strict, clear, bright lines of Vinaya where of the sort of this code where it's like this is when I cut things off. Um, and just not to have it be a temptation then. And there are apps like Freedom is an app which lets you cut off access to internet and apps for a time. And then to do that for an uposa today, like one day, I know Gandhi would take one day a week and live in silence. And I think that is something I would like to cultivate more, as periods where one day a week there really is a shutting off of that communication. And I have tried to cultivate that. And then the Buddha also spoke about, 3 months retreat, rains retreat every year for the monastics. And, I think at Abhayagiri, it's quite well held that during those 3 months of winter retreat, you don't get access to the internet. And we're not in situations where we can hold that completely at the moment, just because, we're making a monastery. But I think we can aim towards the ethic, and eventually I think we can hold that. But I think not having that constant temptation there is important. And I think the other thing is just to contemplate a metaphor of what of the different cosmological realms that the internet represents. I find that very interesting to like map things on. And because you have your hell realms, you have your realms of the asuras who are like fighting each other, and then you have the human realm, and whatever movies. I don't know what YouTube would be. Probably depends. But then it is interesting because you get up to these higher realms in the Buddhist cosmology of the devas who delight in the creation, delight in creating, and the devas that delight in the creation of others. And I found that consuming via the internet leads to the sense of bondage of being reborn into these worlds.
Hungry
Because,
ghost
yeah,
mentality.
exactly. Plenty of hungry ghost realms.
Hmm.
I don't know what else. Yeah, but there is the sense of being existing in this realm of using the internet to produce beautiful things, which it really can allow, um, and to communicate. But that's more these upper heavenly realms of like delighting in the creations of others and in creating. So I find there's a sense of freedom hidden in those upper, deva realms of the internet, if you will.
Mm. Wow,
Uh,
cool,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I think mapping like different bhikkhu or monk rules and different nun rules from the Pali Canon, like seeing how they might apply in internet context. I think that's a great exercise. I mean, there's all these rules about basically agochara, places which are non-resorts, like places where a monk or nun shouldn't go. These are like a bar. Monks don't have any reason to be going to bars in
Right.
the evening on Reddit. Yeah, and maybe, but that's the thing. Like with some things, and this is maybe we can talk a bit about our experiences with how different monasteries. So basically, you and I are, for the most part, you're living alone in a hut in Seattle. I'm basically living alone in a dorm in Ukiah, and basically creating our own, mapping our own, and navigating our own way to figure out how the Vinaya these monks' rules, the rules that the Buddha laid down, how would those apply? How do they make sense in an internet context? And everybody kind of has to do that themselves, unless you live in a monastery, in which case the abbot or the senior monks kind of create the digital culture around you. And yeah, I mean, I've lived in some monasteries. I think Abhayagiri has a pretty strict firewall. So it's like you just can't go to these Agochara websites. Like you can't, there's no way that, we've got young men coming to the monastery wanting to ordain, and I'd venture to say that most young men these days probably have unhealthy internet habits, and a lot of those you just can't feed in the internet in a monastery because of these firewalls that have been put up, and you're voluntarily putting yourself in that environment. Have you seen anything else in that way in terms of institutional encouragements or strongholds to permit or to encourage healthy internet use?
And first of all, people should feel free to type in questions you'd like to talk about, and just we'll get a backlog that we're ready to speak to in a second around this or other topics. But that's really interesting, Ajahn. And one thing is, I know when they do mental maps, they of like seeing how the brain works. When you have a tool, your body begins to consider it part of the body and conceive of it as that. Like very, the brain really considers the hammer as a limb, basically, and works with it. And I think the same thing has very much happened with phones, smartphones, is if you don't have it, it kind of feels like you're missing a limb. And I just remember a few days ago, I was outside and like someone's iPhone rang somewhere within 20 feet. And like three of us were all like, trying to figure out if it was, it was just silly how many people were alarmed or, and it becomes visceral. And it strikes me, so many of our Sekya rules, so the monks have and the nuns have a long list of rules about how we comport ourselves in public, how we walk, how we cover ourselves, what we do with our hands. Like we can't stand with our hands akimbo, etc. And that sort of physical restraint, I think, actually becomes very relevant with touching, feeling, fondling a phone and how we interact with a smartphone, because we do have smartphones now. Like it's kind of a necessity as a monk in the world. And yeah, I mean, apart from just the usual restraint of like, can you leave it at home at times? How do we hold how do we hold it as part of our bodies? Because that's what a tool becomes in our mental map, and apply that same sort of restraint to it. So just a thought, and to yeah. So a thought. What about you, Ajahn?
I'm curious if you could speak to that. I mean, you said something. It's kind of essential for a monk in the world these days. A cell phone, a smartphone is kind of essential.
Mm-hmm.
Could you qualify that? I mean, I think some people might jump on there. I mean, I have one professor who says he's, pretty convinced that the Buddha would not have allowed monks to use cell phones. And I could definitely imagine someone saying, "You're completely ridiculous. You can just live in the forest and you don't need a phone at all." And
Yes.
yeah, so what would you say?
Good call, Ajahn. Yeah, I think there definitely are situations, and we've both lived in them, where you don't need a smartphone. And I think those are beautiful situations to exist in. And there's times when I think you and I know that it will be very good for us to be in situations like that, where we don't have access to those things. And that is good. More to say that in the current environment, say for me, or a monastic trying to organize a community, basically, or exist in one, it's a growing community and there's a lot of moving parts. I need a smartphone. If I'm out on going to the Saturday gathering, it's like, St. Mark's, where we meet, the person with the keys not there, the door's locked. We have, the AV equipment's out. We need to verify a login for the Zoom and we haven't done it, etc. We need to hotspot the computer because the Wi-Fi password's wrong. It just, so in certain contexts, but I think that's a really good point, Ajahn, is there needs to be points where that's not the case, and to have a reference point of that, maybe weekly, but certainly yearly, a period of retreat where you do get to put it down. And yeah, good point.
But I feel like you, and yeah, I think both of us really try to interpret rules, figure out strictures so that we're trustworthy, so that people, okay, even if someone sees, for the most part, actually, we try not to use cell phones in public. There's actually a way to like hide your cell phone in your robe so that you can kind of be like,
I
talking
can
like this
example,
into it. Yeah.
like this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
not very subtle.
Yeah. I know what you're doing, but not everybody would. They might just think you're being weird. But yeah, so we're not bringing them out in public. But even if we did, there are checks and balances. Like, with male monastics, there are rules about being alone with, yeah, people that they're attracted to, or female monastics similarly. And yeah, I mean, it's almost a protocol that we will CC each other or someone else if there is going to be something which could be construed as a private conversation that could be misread as intimate in an inappropriate way. So yeah, I feel like if monks are being trustworthy and can point to the actual techniques that they're using to remain so, then yeah, things stay above board. So.
Ajahn, speaking of the benefits of technology, might I bring up some questions?
Yeah, let's do that.
As monastics, is there a struggle with teaching increasing a sense of self, especially if you are measuring success of the Dhamma teaching by listener reaction, whether local or global, with net? Ajahn?
Definitely. Yeah, but the sense of self is just so ridiculous that I can, increase my sense of self by being someone who doesn't have a phone. I mean, that was like a huge part of my identity for like my first 5 years as a monk. I'm a strict forest monk. I don't have a phone. I'm always in the forest, and or even like as a junior monk, not giving teachings, I'm someone who doesn't give teachings, like someone who puts themselves in the form of a teacher. They're stuck up and whatever. So yeah, the sense of self can definitely plug itself into anything, this capacity and inclination, and it's really silly. But no, you make a really good point. I mean, the Buddha warned many, many times. There's a whole book of the Samyutta, chapter of the Samyutta called Gain, Honor, and Praise, Labha, Sakara, Siloka. And we touched on this in our last conversation about finding humility in praise. But the Buddha really said, yet dreadful, terrible indeed are gain, honor, and praise for realizing the unsurpassed security from bondage, nibbana. And yeah, no, it's definitely something we have to keep an eye on. And I feel grateful that Ajahn Nisabho and I have each other to kind of keep one another in check and not kind of allow that tendency, because you can see it, you can kind of smell the sense of self, or get a sense for it, and it's not attractive. So what are your thoughts, Ajahn?
You were saying them like from my head. I mean, it's just, yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that Samyutta myself. I mean, the view counts are insidious even for monastics, and it's something to be really careful about. And the Buddha, Ajahn Kovilo is correct. Like a whole book of the Samyutta Nikaya is all these brutal metaphors about how gain, honor, and praise poison the bone, or or like sitting on a pile of gain, honor, and praise is a bit like a dung beetle, like celebrating its gigantic pile of dung. And he really put some strong imagery there, and I see why. I mean, it is dangerous. So yeah, good question, and we certainly work with that, and I am grateful we have one another around that. And my parents also kind of help me with that. They call me on things often. So
And our monk friends. Yeah.
oh yeah, and it's helpful. It's really helpful to have, like, the Buddha, when he attained awakening, said, "Who do I bow to?" You have to bow to someone, and he said, "I'll bow to the Dhamma." But we have like very senior teachers who we are both respectful of, in love with, and terrified of, all at the same time. And I find going and really, they do speak to us and they do call us on things. Is that accurate, Ajahn, would you say? Did I put any words in your mouth there?
No, yeah,
Okay.
accurate all around.
Hi, Ajahns. Do you have any advice for finding one's own seat of awakening, or bodhicitta, within ourselves? Is it individual, or are there general paths to take?
Please, Venerable.
I would say the Buddha, when he talked about where to give, when people asked him where to give, he was so careful about granting that individual freedom and giving it primacy. He said, give where you feel inspired, and there are other instances where he'll like lay out the sort of most meritorious places to give. You give to someone with powerful sila, morality. You give to the sangha. You give to, all these things. But whenever he those were separate teachings, or at least separated in the specific moment from a very clear and repeated encouragement to give where you feel inspired. And I just think that's true, beautiful in his acknowledging of, joy in the Abhidhamma is a comic amplifier. And basically that act of giving is one of the real first acts of true freedom we have, beyond defilement, beyond kilesa. I mean, there's something very sacred about it. And I find people do have there's something very unique about everyone's path to that giving and how it manifests. And often it manifests through our particular brokenness or proclivities or interests, like Angela, who asked that question, I know works with animals and, therapy with animals and using animals to help provide therapy for people. And it's such a specific way of helping that, who would out of the ether pick that as a path. And yet when you get to feel where that inspiration leads you, there's something very sacred about it. So I'd say finding that seat of bodhicitta, like, the foundation is the practice and learning to make space in your daily meditation and with right view for a place where you can hear that inner voice, guiding you, and that inner kind of voice of the chitta kind of. But I think there's something very unique and special and joyful about the individual path to that giving. Ajahn?
Yeah, maybe just a quick response. Got a few more questions, but yeah, bodhicitta, finding bodhicitta, it's not a term which you find in the Pali Canon. And in different Mahayana texts, it has different meanings. One of them is this initial resolve to become a Buddha. So basically to become a bodhisattva. So that's kind of what Ajahn Nisabho was talking to that to some extent in terms of like, how do you channel your generosity? But it can also mean the mind of awakening, the awakening mind. So basically that which is awake in the present moment. And I feel like it's, in terms of finding that, I think it's really useful. This is not something which is often taught, but the principle of yoniso manasikara, or wise attention, yoni, looking to the womb, looking to that which is most fundamental. So basically, having a way of interacting with your meditation object, especially mantras. So the Buddho mantra is most popular in the Thai tradition, or the Guanyin mantra very much works with this in a Mahayana context. But basically, when you call on this mantra, it's not just a inert and lifeless thing which you say, but actually it can be a question like, what would lead to flourishing right now? That question is imbued in the mantra itself, Buddho. Like, what would lead to flourishing? What would lead to this mind of awakening? And actually listening to that, having that question imbued in the mantra or imbued in your meditation object, listening to the answer and then letting it soften you and bringing you in the direction of awakening.
Ajahn, do you think listening to Dhamma on YouTube daily or reading teachings on social media also considered an addiction?
Do you want to do this, Venerable?
Go for it.
Um, there's one way of conceiving the path as like just getting better and better at our addictions. I mean, samadhi or concentration really can be conceived of as the best addiction, and a one which has so many, the drawbacks are just so minuscule and compared to the drawbacks of our normal addictions. And in terms of, if we're going to be addicted to something on the internet, might as well be Dhamma quotes and, weaning ourselves off of more coarse and, less Dhammic and more worldly, more kind of scattered, less peaceful addictions, obsessions, and then weaning ourselves off using these more skillful, enjoyable objects. What do you think, Ajahn?
I think you're right. I like it.
Okay.
Dharma is the best process addiction.
Process addiction.
Yeah, there's substance addiction and process addiction. Process addictions like gambling. And the Buddha said that if, recluses of other traditions accuse you of being addicted to jhana, you should say, yes, we are addicted to jhana. So I think the same probably applies to Dhamma talks in some sense of it's a good addiction.
That is fascinating. I would love to see a reference to that at some point.
Digha Nikaya 26, I believe.
Cool.
So yeah, it's I love that quote. It might be 29. I can't remember. Late 20s. Do you look at or use your phone while on the ferry? Do you behave a certain way with your phone in public?
This is you, Venerable, please.
So
I don't have a ferry.
yeah, that's true. Sandra, we did speak to this a little bit, and I think we try not to use the phone as much in public. And to be honest, I'm not perfect about this one. I feel like I do have to refine my contact on this. But I think it's an important one to keep in mind as a monastic, is how you're representing yourself. Because even though we do, in this current context, it's necessary to use a smartphone, you can be careful about when you do. So often, say I sort of will duck into a corner if I need to make a call, and then when you're walking off the ferry, I'll usually hang up and call people afterwards, something like that. Ajahn, how much listening is too much? I've noticed every teacher teaches differently the same topics. What do you recommend on listening to too many teachers?
I would say don't do it, but also don't listen to too few teachers. I mean, this is kind of like the middle path, and everybody has to figure out the right answer. The Buddha did encourage his monks to go and listen to Sariputta from time to time, and he would celebrate the monks who wanted to spend time with Mahakassapa, or the ones who wanted to spend time with Mahamoggallana. And he wasn't just saying, I'm the only teacher you should be listening to. So really it does depend on you and what you, and this is the element of, Dhammic maturity that we just have to figure out for ourselves. Atanyu, we have to know ourselves and our own proclivities, and what is too much and what's not enough, and don't do either one of those, but just stick with the middle. And it really is kind of a, you go too far in one direction, and you're either starving for Dharma, or you get too much and you're kind of bloated with Dhamma, and that can suck as well. So, any thoughts, Ajahn? Is that, we're close to time, but what do you think about listening to too much Dhamma?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think really finding, a sort of ecosystem of Dhamma you feel comfortable with, because there is an inner cohesion and logic to the systems of thought, say in the Mahayana and the Theravada. And if you mix and match too much all the time, without firmly grounding in the teachings, I think it can be a bit difficult. That being said, I think, first of all, once you've gained a really firm grounding in like one system, I think you can branch out a little bit. And I find that there are moments where it's really useful to revitalize the practice, to sort of listen to a slightly different angle on something. So if you're having trouble with breath meditation, maybe read Shaila Catherine or Ajahn Brahm or something and just get a slightly different angle. And Ajahn, the sutta on the addicted to John, I think it's Pasadika Sutta, Digha Nikaya 29. So
Nice. Cool.
yeah, I love that reference.
All right.
But I do think we have to end. So Ajahn, thank you so much for the conversation and everyone for joining us. We're going to meet on Zoom now for those who want to. Either you can click on the link I'm posting in the chat, and we'll be speaking there in a more intimate context from 6:45 to 7:30. If you can't see that link or something, just go to clearmountainmonastery.org, scroll halfway down the page, and you should see a link there. And as always, it's just a pleasure to have this community growing on the internet and to see everyone here. So, Ajahn, Namaste Khan.
Namaste Khan.